good morning, and good afternoon to in-house counsel from all across America. Welcome to In-House Connect. My name is Shai Mahani. I am the CEO and co-founder of In-House Connect, and I'm thrilled to have you here with us today. Thank you for spending your breakfast time or your lunch time with us. And special thanks to our wonderful sponsor, Pramata, and our fantastic presenters today, Justin Schweisberger and Foster Sayers, for putting together a fantastic presentation on the top 5 CLM frustrations and how to overcome them. For those of you here for the first time, let me give you a quick bit of background. In-House Connect started 11 years ago as a New York City-based meetup group for in-house counsel. Every month, In-House Connect would organize free CLE and non-CLE classes hosted by different law firms, which were followed by cocktail networking receptions. And every 6 months, we would organize fun and festive networking mixers. Over the years, we've helped thousands of in-house counsel connect with peers and outside counsel alike. The group was humming along, and then COVID hit. We couldn't meet in person, so we met online, and it's been a fantastic transition. We've been able to attract a much larger audience of in-house counsel from coast to coast and feature high caliber speakers like the two we have today, who I'm going to introduce in just a few minutes. This is actually our 29th event of the year. So let's get to our event, the top 5 contract management frustrations and how to overcome them. Our presenters today are Justin Schweisberger and Foster Sayers. As one of the company's earliest employees, Justin leads the company's global market positioning and forges Pramata's relationships with some of the world's top brands. He has extensive experience in guiding large-scale companies through post-merger integrations in support of employee retention, contract risk mitigation, and business process initiatives. Previously, Justin managed M&A due diligence and contract management initiatives for one of the country's largest law firms. During this time, he most notably guided a $6 billion acquisition of a leader in the metals industry. Our next panelist is Foster Sayers. Foster is an experienced legal and business professional with experiences ranging from founding a company and raising capital to implementing best practices for leading private equity firms, Bain Capital, and Vista Equity Partners. He joins Pramata from Vertafore, a Roper Technologies company, and is a successful Pramata customer. Foster is passionate about using his technical knowledge to help legal professionals become more effective in their practice. So fortunate to have Justin and Foster on with us today to help us overcome the top 5 CLM frustrations. And with that, I'll turn things over to Justin to get us started.
Great. Thanks, Shai, and thanks everybody for joining today. I'm really excited to have Foster, and I'll get right to him as the star of the show. Both excited to have him here today, but also generally with Pramata. For those of you that don't know, he just joined the company a couple weeks ago as a former Pramata customer, has a lot of experience in contract management, and we're very, very lucky to have him, and he's going to share those experiences here in just a second. A couple of quick things for everybody. First, please do use the chat. I will be keeping an eye on that. That's my one responsibility today, is to make sure that I facilitate your questions to Foster. So if you have any, drop them in the chat. I'll keep an eye on them. And also, it may be if something's more appropriate towards the end for the Q&A session, great. However, if there's a way to weave it into the individual sections along the way, I will definitely do that. So to get things kicked off, we were at an event a couple of weeks ago, a webinar on CLM basics. And one of the things that we asked the audience was, what is your top frustration that you have? And we use that to really shape the conversations today. As you can see, there's a runaway winner. So people are spending way too much time searching, finding information, reviewing contracts. So 57% of the people who joined had that as their top frustration. So we're going to kick off with that. I will hand over to Foster to talk a little bit more, but I know just to even frame it up a little bit better, it would be great to learn how people are doing this today. So this will really feed into Foster's conversation. I'll kick it over to Foster while we go ahead and run the poll.
It's the number one frustration, right? And I'm going to guess that poll probably bears out in today's attendance too, right? I'm sure over half of you have the frustration, even if it's not your number one, probably 100% of you, unless you are, Pramata customer we invited, are spending too much time, right? Researching, reviewing, searching. And what I would like to know is, as I kind of talk about my experiences, would be curious to hear from you guys in the chat about, how many locations are you managing contracts in or storing them? Perhaps not managing and storing them, right? You might have filing cabinets. And how long? Like, what's your upper bound? How long can it take you to find contracts? Tell us in the chat. So when I joined Vertafore in February of 2017, the company had been around almost 50 years. And while a lot of, there are a number of reasons, right? While companies struggle to find contracts, but for us, the company had grown through acquisition and it averaged one every 2 to 3 years. So by the time I started, there were contracts in over a dozen physical electronic locations. If you can beat 13 different locations where you're storing your contracts, please tell us in the chat. So to find a contract required you, when you joined the company, to learn where that product contract was stored, at what location, and you had to know who could give you access to that file server or that system, right? And so when I joined Vertafore in the beginning of 2017, I was told by the incumbent legal department, who I was there to replace, that it could take up to 2 weeks to turn around a contract. We had a request come into the legal inbox and they said, hey, send a response is to caution them it could take up to 2 weeks. And I thought that was silly until I had that experience, right? We had an older, product we acquired a long time ago, not a lot of customers on it, hosted in an obscure location. The only person that could give access to it was on PTO. And it fully took 2 weeks to get that contract turned around. I'm so hardwired to seek efficiency that made me ill. I physically felt sick when they told me that I had to tell my internal business partner, hey, it could take 2 weeks. I only told them that the first time. And I was like, no, I'm never telling someone that again. Even if it takes that long, I'm going to update them every day until I find it, right? I value good customer service. But also, I value my reputation. I was embarrassed that was the state of affairs for the legal department. And also, I'm an empathetic person. And so I really felt like it was unfair to our internal business partners, right? It's the people in customer support or accounts receivable or central sales who are bearing the brunt of that customer's frustration because they can't get an answer. They can't get a copy of their contract to meet some audit requirement. They can't get an answer about when their renewal term starts, or the answer is different every time they call in to get it. It's a horrible customer experience. And I was committed that was not going to be how I lived my life, right? We needed one solution, right? And, that's what we did. I was fortunate that, and I'll talk about this later in our discussion. I was fortunate that we had a business mandate to be operationally excellent, right? We had to get better at these things. We weren't going to operate our business blind without being excellent at contracts. So we were going to invest in the solution. Unfortunately, the general counsel at Vertafore at the time who hired me, Janie Rothman, had the vision to work with Pramata. And we'll talk more about how we and why we chose them as we went through that first request for proposal. But that was for us the starting point for success. Get everything that we have today accessible, understandable, searchable, complete, and accurate in one place. And the last pillar there, right? Self-service access. I have yet to meet an attorney, a paralegal, a legal ops professional, contracts administrator, contracts manager. I haven't met any class of person who works in a legal department who has said, you know what? I love having to pull contracts for salespeople. I love having to read contracts and tell them plain terms for salespeople. Haven't heard anyone tell me that. What they love, right, is self-service. Unfortunately, because of the way things were, right, we just had a legal inbox that people would send in requests for contracts at the time. I don't have metrics to give you on how fewer requests that we received as a legal department, but I can say anecdotally, it was night and day, right? Once we had Pramata, it just dropped off. Why? Because we implemented Pramata within Salesforce. All the folks who are doing these tasks to complete their jobs are in Salesforce. And so to be able to stay in that system and self-service with the touch of a button, jump to the view where they can see the contracts, and not just see the contracts, right? They see a link to the contracts, and what they really see is the contract title and the relevant key terms, right? What's the effective date? What's the renewal date? What's the notification period if they want to terminate? And just by doing that, it changed our world, right? It changed the world for me, changed the world for people in our business, right? Because now everybody's more efficient. You're not waiting around on legal or someone in the legal department to be the one to get you the contract that you need to do whatever you're trying to do, or to confirm a term, right? Because we've digitized that. We've extracted that key term and we've made it simple. All right, let's take a look at the poll, shall we? And I think I'll turn back to you, Justin.
Yeah, it looks like, so first of all, the thing that jumps out is there are 2 people on this call who have achieved that operational excellence. 2 out of 35 people have everything all in one place. So I'd like to acknowledge that, the good stuff first. It looks like everybody else, I think the overwhelming top pick was my head hurts even thinking about it, which I definitely understand. But I'd say on average, most people have stuff stored in 3 or 4 or 4 plus, or it can't even count the number of places. So this is pretty common with what we see. But I would still like to acknowledge those 2 people for doing such an awesome job.
Yeah, me too. And here's the thing, right? And we share these results. I'm going to just minimize that poll. Okay. Hopefully not disrupt anything. But, the thing is like, when we were starting on this project, we didn't even know. We didn't even know everywhere we had contracts. And so, part of the benefit of making it your mission, right, to get everything into one, and you don't have to do it all at once, right? We went in stages at Vertfor. We did revenue first, then we did vendor. But what I'm saying is that the exercise in and of itself is like, wow, like I mean, I started, I think, with 9 repositories that I was trying to get data extracted from to send to Pramata, and I ended up at like 13, because as people learned that I was on this project, they'd be like, hey, you should talk to this person because I'm pretty sure they have contracts for this business unit in there. And, of course they would. All right. Time for another poll, I think. Is it Justin?
It is. I think that one of the challenges that we face. So the next question is really centered around your contract management priorities, and the sometimes challenging, conflicting priorities that people face. Balancing adding value to the business, partnering with them versus making the legal team more efficient. And so I know that nothing is ever 100 or 0 of either of these 2. So I'm well aware of that. But I also think it's instructive to declare, this is what we think the mandate is here. And this is how we think we should prioritize and make trade-offs. So that's, I think that's the poll, and we can talk a little bit about that and revisit on the back end.
Yeah. So frustration number 2 in rank was we have competing priorities. We've got to provide business value, but we also need to be more efficient and legal to do that. So one of the things that I want to talk about and help you with during our session and our time together is looking at how you can get operational alignment and discussing what I feel are the keys to navigating those competing priorities. So in legal, your priority is, I want to be able to control my work better, and I want to invest in tools that make it easier to do my work. Business priority, surprise, right? We all know this. It's control costs, and it's to invest in tools that deliver value, right? So sometimes, right, it's important to understand things in the negative, right? So what is alignment not? Alignment is not solving something that is only painful for legal, but not for the rest of the business, right? So it might be painful the way that you work with, salespeople, and you might want to implement all of these steps and process around it, but that's only painful for you. And if you've added a bunch of touch and slowed down your contract velocity, business isn't going to support that, right? So again, it's not tools that make it easier for legal to manage work, but add process and time to contracting. So just to be clear, right, this is not an NDA solution, right? If you can get one of those approved, great, but it's unlikely the business will want to invest in something like that because it's not a revenue contract. Like, the business doesn't value NDAs, right? The business values revenue contracts. You in legal find NDAs annoying, but annoying isn't a value proposition to the business, right? So I was hired by the new ownership of Vertafore, Vista Equity Partners, who purchased Vertafore with Bain in August of 2016. And I was chosen not merely because I was an attorney who could, perform the legal support of an in-house counsel is expected to for a company of Vertafore's size and industry. It's also because I had the business acumen to be able to partner with the business to implement the best practices that Vista and Bain know are key to achieving operational excellence, which is at the core of accomplishing all of the company's strategic goals. And so, I didn't learn any of their special secret sauce, right? Because I wasn't in that part of the business. And with legal, it's more guidance than mandates, but you're still expected to support the overall operational excellence. And when it comes to the pre-signature part of contracting and being good at contracts, your focus is just supporting reducing touch and the effort to create a contract, making it simple enough that it can be done without involving you, right? Ideally. And then the real emphasis for legal and the things that we take ownership of is then the contracts post-signature, right? Legal is tasked with, they don't tell you how you have to do it, but they say that you must be in a position to manage, operate, and report out on your contracts, right? And at Vertafore, we were so successful with our first contracts management solution for our revenue contracts, our sales contracts, because we approached it from that best practice perspective. So, Vista had its playbook for the contract generation, and it was implement CPQ, and legal was just needed to step up and support the automation of adding routine terms and conditions. It took 2 years, but we got it done, and our contract velocity went up 50%. And legal, fortunately, was given free rein to determine how to solve for the ongoing, management, operation, and reporting from a single repository. And so selecting and evaluating different vendors, right? We talked to many. And what set Pramata apart for us was a couple of things. One is that it didn't impose any contract workflows in order for us to be able to use the solution, because that wouldn't align with the best practice of reducing touch in contract creation. We just, invested all this time and effort into simplifying that. So every solution that tried to, impose their will on us in terms of how we made our contracts, was disqualified. And it was really down to, Pramata and one other vendor at the end. And what really set Pramata's apart is they were willing to support the risk scoring of our contracts, which was a best practice that we wanted to implement, and no one else was able to support it. And our private equity owners, they emphasized and placed so much value on data and contract data because they knew it was absolutely critical to improve a company's valuation, right? It takes a lot longer to flip a company than it does a house. And organizational transformation, it takes longer than remodeling a home. But, both of those activities have a playbook, right? And they want you to stick to those tried and true practices. And, the contract repository, that's like the open floor plan, update the kitchen of, flipping a house in the remodeling project, right? So legal priorities, right? And business priorities, how do you align those? You tie the contract solution to the strategic goals for the business. Achieving and supporting operational improvements for the business as a whole, right? Not just you and legal. And when you do that, you should be increasing your contracts velocity, right? This best practice shouldn't be a big secret, right? The faster you create contracts, the faster you book revenue, the faster you invoice revenue, the faster you recognize revenue, right? The slower you do that, the slower all of that is. And so if you want high growth, you want it and you want to drive up evaluation. If you want to achieve an outcome where you're trying to sell a company you bought and get a big return within just a matter of a few years, you can't have some 3-year, 4-year, 5-year contract enterprise application strategy, right? And so part of that alignment, right, is making sure that whatever tool that you're implementing, right, aligns with that. Not all of you here are in the private equity cycle, right? And so, a 5-year plan may not be so intimidating, but, there's a lot of risk, right? And so I think that's another part, right? Align it relative to the fact that the business wants successful projects and they want to manage risk. So by starting with your contracts database, getting that right, succeeding, then you can add and address other things, right? But you'll have gotten confidence in the business. They'll see the value, right? Because they have that data and they're able to use it. So, Justin, what do we have? What have we gotten in the chat so far?
So it's a pretty good mix on the poll. Let me hit that first. So it's about 59% say the legal more efficient is the top priority, and then 41% kind of aligning to the business. And as I mentioned earlier, this is really a false choice, right? There are definitely ways to create that. It's more to make people think, like, how do you really look at your own initiatives? And I think, the experiences you had, Foster, are a great example. Look, I understand not everybody on here is trying to flip a company, right? But what you did, and I appreciate what you did at Vertifor, is you sat down and understood, well, what are you trying to do? In your case, it was flip the company, right? That was the business goal. And you said, all right, how can legal best support that priority? By the way, I know from the previous challenge that it made you insanely more efficient at responding to requests. And so I think just getting that order of operation right for people on here, it is a false choice. I knew that when we crafted the question. I think it's more to encourage people on here to really think about what are we trying to do as a business, whether it's flip the company, whether it's improve our operating margin, whether it's, dramatically accelerate revenue growth or take on there's a whole set of things that people are trying to do, and then work back to how the legal team can support that and become more efficient in supporting that. So I think this is great.
And let me point out my pro tip here, right? Prioritizing better revenue contracts always aligns with business priorities. Always, yeah. Right? If your legal solution makes you more efficient, great. But if it does that in a revenue contract, that typically means you can say, look, we're going to be getting contracts out the door faster because of this, right? Businesses like that. Or having all this data on a revenue contracts, then we'll know everyone whose uplift is tied to CPI. Have you seen CPI lately?
Yeah.
That's this kind of stuff you can do. Yeah. All right, let's go on to our next poll.
On to the next poll, which is I think we're centered primarily around the adoption. And I don't know how many people on here have tried to roll out CLM or contract management deployments and had either an experience where you built a great system and for whatever reason people didn't use it, or maybe it wasn't great. It'd just be interesting to know how many people have had an experience like that. And obviously not every experience. And I'm expecting, by the way, at least 2 no's, because there were 2 people who had achieved operational excellence before. So anyway, I'll hand it back over to you, Foster, and keep an eye on the poll and questions. And I appreciate all the collaboration on the chat too. It's really great. Great to see.
Awesome. So frustration number 3, lack of buy-in and low adoption. News. For those, I saw there's a decent number of people who haven't implemented yet, which is great because you're going to hear this presentation and you're going to have a really good roadmap for success and hopefully be one of the success stories. So the way to avoid lack of buy-in and low adoption is, well, I'm going to tell you, but I think what I want to say really is just don't feel bad that you as a legal professional don't feel like you know this already, right? Like there isn't a course at law school like technology adoption 101 for legal, professionals, right? But I've been lucky enough to be in situations where there was support for doing this kind of stuff. I've had a success, I had a failure, and another success. And so, I had the opportunity to learn, right, in the school of life. And so I'm going to help distill that down for you. So I'm going to start with looking at department initiatives. And for most contract management solutions, that's where they begin. Like you in the legal department are telling the business, like, we need to do something here. Like, we can't live like this. This is also where a lot of them end, right? You never get your project off the ground. And you need to make sure that you understand where you are, right? It's just like when you come up to the outlet mall and you're like, wow, we want to go to this store, but like, I don't know where it is. And you look at the map, what's the first thing you figure out? You are here, right? You need to orient yourself towards, the world and your project to figure out where you're going to go. So the best way to do that, if you're starting this, like if you were one of the, it looked like, at least 40%, I minimized the poll so it wouldn't distract me. But if you're one of the many people on here who's like just starting out, this is the framework right here that I'm about to talk about that I would like you to go through to best position your success. Start with your noble why and start by asking yourself the right questions, right? The right question is, what is most painful? What is most painful about the current state of contract management? What has to change, right? Like what cannot, like we can't go on a minute longer, right? If I have to spend 2 weeks to find another contract, like I'm walking out the door, guys, I'm gone. Doing that is important. Why? Because it should be one thing. Why should it be one thing? Because solving one problem at a time is a tried and true method. Trying to solve multiple problems at a time is really hard to do. And if you've never solved a problem with legal technology before, I'd say solve one first and get it right and learn from that before you try to solve 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different things, right? You don't have to boil the ocean because ultimately that one thing, doing it right, especially in the repository context, that gives you the data to know what's in your contracts, to know what you want to change before you start doing that based on assumptions, right? And the other benefit, right, of that approach is the next question that you need to ask and be prepared to answer and answer very well is, how will the improvements in contract management that we want the business to invest in benefit the company? If you're doing stuff pre-signature and you're not 100% certain that that's going to increase your contract's velocity, then the business won't be convinced to invest in it. If they're not going to make money faster, then why would they do it, right? With a contracts database, look, that supports all sorts of business objectives. When we were doing this at Vertifor, right, we were in the business mandate, and I'll talk about, that component of it, but we started from a point of department initiative, right? Like even before we learned that we were given this budget to run this RFP for a contract management solution, we already knew it was going to be our initiative, right? And when we thought about that, we were already aware of a business mandate that we had from our private equity owners, right? And it was that we needed to get customers on long-term contracts. Getting them on long-term contracts was a way to increase the company's valuation when it was time to sell. And we needed in legal to be able to support that. Well, how do you do that if you don't know which customers have which terms? So I was lucky that my department initiative aligned with an existing mandate, right? Have great contracts. And I'll talk about that in a second. But going back to this department initiative, right? Design your solution to resolve the pain and make improvements that clearly support or enhance the value to the broader business. If the business doesn't understand how this makes makes everyone better, right? Not just you, but the business, then they're not going to invest in it. They won't give you that budget. But the other thing that you can do, not just within your group, right, but throughout your organization, is make operational excellence a core value, right? When you decide as a company, right, to make it part of your culture, to be excellent, to do things as well as you can do them, then these investments become part of your nature, right? It won't be automatic, right? But they'll be more forthcoming than if you're casual about that, if it's not something that you're always talking about. We started from business mandate, and business mandates are great if they're the right one. So you got to be sure of that. So if you find yourself, maybe that's why you're on this call, because the business said, look, you need to figure this out. Like, my salespeople hate you guys right now. They can never get an answer quickly. It's just bad. It needs to change, right? So if you have that mandate, be glad, but make sure you've been given the budget as well, right? And also assert your ownership of the decision, right? If we're in charge of making this right, then we're in charge of deciding how we're going to do that, right? And establish the focus internally for the contract management solution. Just as you're well aware, this is likely the first time that you've evaluated a technology solution to be deployed in an enterprise or business context, right? That's not stuff that we do every day as lawyers. And so, that's why hopefully you're here, right? To learn how to do that better. But this is also to make you aware that other people recognize that about you too. And those people who might be more experienced will try to be helpful, right? I say helpful in quotes because they'll just hear something tangentially related with no insight into your goals or focus and be like, oh, have you heard about this? You should look at this. No, just be like, thanks. I'll think about it, right? But what you should do is establish the focus internally. And when they bring you that thing that has this over-engineered stuff that you're like, look, that takes 5 years to implement. We're trying to sell the company in the next 2, so not for us. But, so that's why stay focused, know what you want to do. Don't get distracted and pulled in a direction that's going to cause you to overcommit and introduce additional points of failure in terms of what you need to get right to be successful. Repository first, right? That provides immediate value. So forget boil the ocean approach. If you walk away from here determined like we're not going to boil the ocean, then like I'll feel good. I'll have done something great. Hopefully you pick up a lot of other stuff, but I think that's a key takeaway. The thing to know here, right, with this business initiative and why you kind of assert that legal is taking this stance is that because first, it's so important to get all of your contracts in one place because that generates efficiencies throughout. And also that positions you to best determine future requirements for your life cycle. In legal, right, our perception's skewed by what we actually see. But if we're really excellent at contracts, a lot of them don't even need our eyeballs on them. But what that also means is that could give us a false perception as to how pervasive certain terms are. And you might find yourself, based on a false assumption, engineering some crazy contract workflow around a clause that if you had run the data report on, you'd find out you actually only negotiated 4 times in your last 8,000 agreements. Wow. Glad we spent weeks trying to figure that out. This is why focus is so key. The way that we ultimately leveraged this at Vertafore was with fantastic results. When we first got everything into our database, the first thing we did was we wanted to know what % of our contracts have termination for convenience, could just go away on 60 days notice. 2/3 of our agreements. But not only do we know it was 2/3, we knew which accounts. And so we were able to support a targeted sales motion. And in that 4-year cycle between when Vista and Bain bought Vertafore in August for $2.7 billion, and then 4 years later sold to Roper Technologies for $5.4 billion, we moved and flipped the script. And when that sale came, 2/3 of customers were on long-term agreements. how do you accomplish that if you don't know what's in all of your historical agreements, right? And so not only do you start with the repository first, right? You start with your historical existing agreements. The foundation of your business today is the contracts you have today, right? And so if you're evaluating a solution and you're like, wow, this seems like a great repository, oh, but they don't really know how they're going to get all your historical data, or that's not really what they do well, or they're still working on their AI for that. So you might have to do a bit of, work to get it right. So these are the things that are so crucial to think about at the outset, right, of your project. And I'll tell you, it's such a cool thing when if you're in that cycle to have this digital repository, because what happens as part of your sale? Well, you have due diligence, right? And you have to set up a data room. And setting up that data room can be super time consuming, but it wasn't for me. I had counsel ask me for the material contracts related to our top 80 accounts, and wanted me to put that together in the data room for all of those customer contracts. And it ended up being a few thousand agreements across 80 different accounts, and all of their child accounts. And the request came in at the end of the day one day, and I had it together before lunchtime the next day. And the counsel reached out to me because they said, we need to know how you did this. We started checking folders because we thought that when you said that you were done, you just meant done setting up the folders, not actually setting up the folders with all of the agreements in them, and with your spreadsheet that you gave us, which contained reports on which contracts required, consent to assignment. And they're like, how did you do this, right? Our first reaction was you missed tabs in the spreadsheet or rows, and I explained, right? I had Pramata, and that's how I was able to do that. And it was, I can't tell you what a cool feeling it was for me to be able to do that. But what also wasn't lost on me is that was the fastest transaction that Roper ever closed, even though it was its most expensive at $5.4 billion. And a reason of that, right, is that their due diligence was greatly accelerated. And it's great that we were in a position to do that, right, because of the commitment that we made, 4 years earlier, to do this repository. So I would be interested in the chat to hear from people who have struggled with adopting a solution. Maybe you were pretty confident that what you had solved was right, and then it didn't end up getting adopted. So the reason that I want to cover this is because no one talks about this or they don't talk about it enough when they're evaluating solutions. I mean, fortunately, we at Vertafore, right, we're working with really experienced consultants from Vista and Bain, right, who understood this. But even though they understood it, no one really articulated it to me. And it was something that I learned through the failure that we had, which was when our procurement department wasn't legal. Procurement took ownership of getting a vendor contracts management solution. And they did a traditional CLM. And it imposed a bunch of workflows, and no one was willing to do it. They went around it, right? It was easier to send an email, attach the document you wanted to review, and comment on what you wanted legal to modify, right? So the reason that I want to spend some time here, right, is because again, there's no law school class on here's everything that you need to be thinking about to successfully adopt legal technology, both within your department and throughout the business. It doesn't exist. And so I'm trying to get us there, and to get there, you have to focus on adoption. And what I want everyone to know is you don't start thinking about adoption after you've selected your technology solution, right? You want to do that before, because if you don't, then you risk it not getting adopted. So adoption, what is it? It's the solution is part of a relevant user's daily work, okay? So I adopted this solution, and now it's part of what I do, right? It's part of what I'm using. And it's used for the purpose it was designed for, right? if I have a solution and it was designed to do these three things, it should do these three things. If I'm only using it for one of those three things, then I haven't adopted this solution, right? It's a fail. I have paid for stuff that I'm not using. I've overspent, I've over-engineered. I didn't successfully adopt it. It also means that your prior methods, processes, or solutions have been replaced. If this is the right repository, then I should be in here grabbing my contracts. I shouldn't be back in my old file server, right? Looking them up. And along those lines, right, alternative methods or workarounds are not preferred over the solution. The day that I knew that our procurement-led CLM had failed was the day that I got an email from a colleague to put 30 minutes on my calendar to ask me, how do I request an amendment to update the royalty table on this publisher agreement? And I was like, if we're not adopting technology to be better, more efficient, what are we doing, right? And so I declined her invite. I said, we can't use this. Like, it's not working. Like, we haven't gotten a single contract through this workflow. And the inefficiency it's generating are now profound. And I declined her invitation. And I said, please send me an email with the change, with the updated royalty table, and I'll create your amendment, right? So what people need to realize in understanding adoption, and this is just kind of what I figured out and really thinking about what I learned from my successes and failures, right? And in my mind, there are three components. So the mental component is I understand why adopting a new solution makes sense for me in the business, right? That's the first hurdle to overcome. And with this procurement solution, couldn't even get over that. Mentally, this did not make sense to me. Why am I doing this? Email and Microsoft Word with track changes, like, that's a solved problem. Don't make me do something that makes my life harder or more difficult. It didn't make sense. So there was no mental adoption. Whereas a single contracts repository with everything digitized that integrates with Salesforce, that can be self-service access, drastically reducing the amount of time that legal is required to engage with legal, right? And, it varies month to month, but the last time, as I was leaving Vertifor and looked at this, there were over 1,100 interactions on Salesforce to use the Pramata integration. And what that means is that was 1,100 times someone didn't reach out to legal. So when you do all the math there, right, obviously it's based on some estimates, but let's just say historically, it took 5 minutes for Pramata to answer a contracts question. That's being generous, right? It's being super conservative. So that's 5,500 minutes divided by 60. That's 83 hours of legal department time that you have back. Can you, isn't it, what, they could do so much with 83 hours in a legal department. It's unbelievable, right? And so the mental part, even before I had the metrics, and the benefit of hindsight, we knew that we were going to have a lot more time when we were not doing this for the business, right? So the mental was there, right? And the emotional, right? We were afraid of staying where we were. But you may have people who are afraid of changing, right? They don't want to give up their old way. So you need to get them comfortable embracing that new way, right? You need to get them to emotionally adopt it, right? But if they're totally afraid and they're still fear is dominating their heart when you sign that agreement, getting them to come around by the end of the implementation, you're gonna have an uphill battle, and you're unlikely to win it, right?
If I could share, Foster, a quick story, because I think the emotional piece and all this is excellent. So another Pramata customer shared with me a really awesome story about how they drove adoption and awareness in their business. So within Pramata, we have a concept. So we organize the documents into a hierarchy, and we call it the document family. Sometimes we'll find things that are missing, and we call it an exception. So these are things you need to know to understand the premise. So this particular customer was trying to drive adoption in the sales team. And what she did, the GC, is actually they went to their Halloween party with a group costume, and they were the document family. So the GC was the mother, and she had a little contract that said the master agreement, and she was the parent of the parent contract. The legal team went as various amendments and orders, so the child contracts. And then to make sure that they brought the legal adoption in, or the sales adoption in, they brought the head of customer success, who was an exception. So the one without a parent that was in the conversation. And it was the it was the talk of the party. And I just thought I'd share, there's the logical part, but then, look, if we're honest, not everybody, some people, not me, but some people may not view contracts as the most interesting thing in the world. And we have to make it interesting for them to drive adoption and really catch their attention in pretty unique ways. So I know that was a pretty cool story. I do want to share the poll before the next section, because it's we don't have a poll in the next section, which was, so it looks like from the results, about 45%, 44% of people have not implemented anything. So let's take them out. Of those that had, 3 out of 20, so 15% they have not had a bad experience. That's great. Actually, that's one more than I expected. So number 3, where were you in the earlier poll when we got everything in one place? But I digress, because I think the important thing is that about 85% of people had some sort of bad adoption experiences. And so if you take anything away from this on adoption, it's that you need to dress up in very creative costumes, is the primary driver of adoption in most companies. So anyway, I did want to get that story in there. I know, before we move on.
Thanks, Justin. That story was one of the best I've heard as a legal tech nerd. That's fantastic and really great. I love that. Moving on to the final piece, which is critical, right? And again, like, you have to solve this before you decide the path you're going to go down, which is that people will know how to use the solution and can readily do so, right? The readily do so part is not something to be taken lightly, right? Readily able, right? That they can just use it. And so for us at Vertafore, the reason that we chose Pramata for the revenue contract solution was it was such a slam dunk on adoption because of that Salesforce integration. And just so you know, like, obviously my world changed because I had all of that terrible pain and hardship of finding contracts out of my life. But guess what? Guess who else loved that? Sales loved that. Accounts receivable loved that. Customer success loved that. Customer support loved that. Accounting loved that. Finance loved that. Product loved that. Development loved that. I found ways to help all those people with this solution. And when you achieve something really great like this, it's kind of like, when the team wins the championship, the owner gets handed the trophy first, not, the coach or the best player. However, MVP does also get some hardware, right? And, that adoption supported or operational transformation in such a profound way at Vertafore that I got awards from this. Like, I took them from, because you have to understand, right? When you go from, I'm having a panic attack because I couldn't find this contract right away, and I know that I need to get it today, and I'm worried it's going to take 2 weeks, and so I'm having a panic attack. When you go from that to I can casually push a button and I can see every contract I need to find. You change people's worlds, right? And in the business, they use that data not only to support really strategic sales motions, but I also used it to support our adoption of the new ASC 606 accounting standards. So it made so many things successful that I not only got one glass award, I got 2. So after we went live with Pramata, I was business partner of the year from the sales organization because it totally changed their life. And then I was also Vertafore Way champion of the year, which is kind of like employee of the year, but because we have, over 2,000 employees, we do it for 6 people, and they embody a vertical way principle. Mine was show up curious, because of my curiosity to figure out where all of our contracts were and to get them into this right solution that was adopted by everyone and changed our lives. Like, that was awesome. And that included a trip to the Ritz-Carlton at the Grand Cayman for my wife and I for 5 days and 4 nights away from our children for the first time ever as a couple. So, I'm not saying that your org has these, things in place for you, but I'm just saying, like, this is the kind of value that you can drive when you get this stuff right. And to help you get this stuff right.
A couple questions here from the audience. I think actually it's a nice, Christina Becker, and I think this is a nice segue to the next challenge, which is she's curious how AI plays into this, and how AI would have leveraged your organization, or was leveraged in your organization. Then Cassandra also chimed in with some good points on the repository. I think it would be a nice setup from Christina on the AI challenges section.
Oh, wow. Christina, did you get an advanced copy of the slides? You're setting us up. All right. And we're about to get there, but to just close the loop, to position you guys to be successful in adoption, right? Because if you're not successful in adoption, it's the worst. You likely spent years investing your heart and soul into making something better, only to have like everyone in your org be like, sorry, legal, we don't like this. We're not using this. Like, I can't think of a worse feeling. It's basically the opposite of the feeling I had, right? Which is like, everyone, we love you, Foster. This is amazing, right? So mental, big caution for you guys. Avoid major change management, like imposing new workflows. Why? People don't want to have to relearn a process or change how they think about doing things. I saw it firsthand, right? Procurement said, oh, we're picking this CLM without any input from legal. And yeah, you'll just use these workflows to bank the contracts. I'm like, we will not. And nor did anyone else want to, right? And it was something that no one, like, I was like, I cannot see a world where I'm doing things less efficiently. Like, I'm just not, right? And so you need to make sure that you solve for that, right? And if there are new workflows, it better be an improvement, right? And everyone who is impacted by that workflow better be bought in, right? Emotional. There's always going to be someone in the org, right? Especially if it's someone who's, like your more tenured people, right? They'll be like, this is how I've done it, right? This is where my stuff is, Help them understand, get those people comfortable, right? Like, you don't want them bringing your project down because it was an emotional attachment to the old way, right? Get them comfortable. It's a new technology, but it's an easy technology, right? In most cases, it's going to be light years better than whatever they've been doing. And so, that's the thing to let people know and understand, is to commit that, like, hey, we're not going to shut anything down until, we've gone live and we've all kind of signed off on the success. Getting the practical part right can be very easy depending on how you're going about it, right? And if you're leveraging your adopted systems, CRM integration, right? That's ideal because you've already adopted it. That's where these people are already doing the tasks that have caused them to need you to reach out to them, or that cause them to reach out to you, right? And, for that matter, even if you don't have a CRM to integrate with, if you do have single sign-on, right? If you can just avoid them being in a position where they forget the URL into the new system, whatever you do, make sure that whoever is going to be using the system understands how they would do that and confirms that would be a way that they would have no issues using, day after day, right? Get them in that conversation and talk to them about it beforehand, right? The worst thing you can do is get to your very end and have been in the whole echo chamber of the legal department and your vendor partner this whole time. And then you start talking to the business about, here's what we're rolling out for you, right? Backwards, right? Do that at the front end. Okay, super excited to move on to what our attendees are excited to talk about, which is AI. And this was a frustration, right? People get oversold on this. They get sold on, procurement was oversold on this. I don't want to say I was, because I made my thoughts heard in the RFP process, and they were not heeded because I didn't know the decision. So let's look at some of the issues, right? And here's the thing: and the AI abilities are often overstated, right? I know Justin's aren't overstated because I experienced the 99% accuracy of Vertafore, and I was not spending my time after implementation fixing data all the time. Talked to people recently who are in that and living that life, right? Because they were oversold AI. So no one has a magic AI button, not even Pramata. What Pramata does have are the top technologists in machine learning and really smart, legally trained people on staff, now including myself, who review your specific contracts and ensure that the model is set up for it to be successful, right? We can't just throw them in and then it's magically ready, right? We do a little work, and we know how to do that work right, and we do it well. When you're using something with AI capabilities, be skeptical and ask a human how smart the AI is, right? Like in Pramata's case, you would talk to me or some other customer who has used it. What was your experience? How often were you fixing data? Ask these questions. And I don't mean ask the human convincing you to use it. Require references before accepting what's stated in the sales pitch. There's not going to be any better validation points for you. But if someone says that it's not going to require any lift from you, be like, explain that, right? Because there's so much hype. I mean, think about it. Remember that time you called the customer service and the AI frustrated you so much that you about cracked your screen pounding 0 for the operator? AI is hard to get right, and you should have validation that they've gotten it right. And I don't know of a lot of other solutions that do it as well as Pramata. I certainly know that I had a bad experience with it, right? The procurement team said, well, legal, you don't have to use the workflows. They're still going to use their AI to digitize our historical documents. Yeah, well, not so good. We terminated after 1 year, and then we did another RFP. And fortunately, we were lucky that it worked out where both we in the legal department had matured with our thought process, right? When we first, the reason that we did an RFP was because our first thought was, oh, let's just put our vendor contracts into the existing revenue repository we have. And then we thought, oh, that would be very expensive to do because we have a ton of key terms extraction that we do in our sales agreements that doing them on our vendor contracts wouldn't make sense. We don't care about the same things. So we shouldn't use the same repository model. So we did the RFP. Well, after that failure, 2 things happened. We at Vertafore learned that actually being focused on one thing at a time and getting it right, the sales repository was actually positioning us to be successful and now do a vendor repository. And our vendor contracts are in the same repository as our sales ones, but it's structured against a different data model. So it was much less expensive to implement. We saved money, mitigated our risks by approaching managing our contracts in stages. And so this magic AI button, it's not real, but there are firms that do it well. Pramata is one of them. And with any others, I'm not saying that Pramata is the only one that has, this capability. I think they're the best, but I think what you can do if you are evaluating someone else is making sure that you understand just how good is that AI and really, pin them down on, how often are your customers adding tags after the fact, correcting data, right? That should be something to understand. And again, those references are key. A couple last things with AI. It's always important to know how it will be used. And when it comes to the world of contracts, as long as there aren't any automated decisions being made, it's unlikely to be a concern. But because I'm talking to legal folks and I'm all about making legal folks smarter, I just want to talk about this because I recently was a panelist on ethics and AI. And one of the things that is evolving in this area of the law is this concept of discrimination by proxy. And so anytime you're using AI, make sure that you understand what data it's using, that data is not discriminatory. And also, if it's automating any decisions, audit those outcomes to make sure that they aren't, basically guilty of discrimination by proxy, right? The intent of the algorithm wasn't to discriminate, but the outcomes are discriminatory. Just a quick point on that. But coming back, I hopefully covered some stuff on AI for you guys who are interested in and are better positioned to evaluate that. We have another poll coming up, and Justin has been monitoring the chat, so I'm going to flip it back to Justin.
Great. This is our last poll, so get it out there. And one of the things as we move forward, actually, I saw it in the chat. It was from Cassandra, I think, which is, working with vendors, sometimes they try to push their technology as a starting point versus your particular process. And I'd love to see if people have had any experiences with that. I'm sure that different people have had different experiences along the way with these potential vendors, but it'd be great to just understand a little bit, what your perceptions have been. Honestly, this is really good feedback for us. I'm not saying that we're innocent in this whole thing as a company, right? It's how do we do better? And what is the frequency of which you've seen people really start with their technology, their workflow, their whatever, and then kind of work back to what you need. So I'll hand it back over to you, Foster, along the way.
Awesome. So I know that this was super frustrating for me, and I experienced it more times than I count. All 3 RFPs that we did, people started telling me how things should be, right? And the 3rd time around, which was actually just this time last year, was when we did our RFP for a vendor solution. And even though I was, pretty confident we were going to select Pramata, that's just the way our business is. You run an RFP, you invite vendors, Pramata was in the final 3. And, what distinguishes them is there weren't any of these extra features, right? And they really matched our focus. And they also did not irk me when they demoed by acting like they knew more about what I should be doing than I did. So I just can't tell you how critical it is that you stay focused to filter out noise during the evaluation, because every time you get distracted and pulled away from your core objective, you have introduced likely a variable that compounds the likelihood of your failure. So this is the money slide. So if anybody drifted off, please tune back in. All right. Have your requirements in place before you begin receiving proposals. Some of us, right, on this call, like I've never come up with technology requirements. I don't know how to do this. Slow down, hang on, calm down. It's okay, right? You don't need to be an expert in technology to come up with your requirements, right? Your requirements can be as simple as I need a single contracts repository where all my contracts are digitized and fully searchable, right? Boom. Keep it simple, right? And it can be that simple. And you can approach that different ways. But what you got to be careful about is look out for the extra features that are required to make the solution work. So you might say, I want a single digital repository with all my contracts digitized and key terms extracted. That's your Northern Star. You talk to a vendor and they say, we can meet these requirements. But then they say, to meet these requirements, you also need to adopt these other things, right? And, that was really what made our procurement solution such a disaster. Like when we had that failure, those extra features were, you have to use our workflows. You have to set up the contract enter all of the data about the contract and the front end when you start to build it for our solution to then capture that data and associate it with the contract. And I'm just like, wow, that's a lot of lift for us. So I wish that we had not selected a solution that has these extra features to make it meet our requirements, right? So be mindful of that, right? Does this meet my requirements, but in a way that requires something beyond what I contemplated having to do when I had my vision for what this would be, right? And your vision should be to have a low touch, automated way to manage your contracts, right? Step one is get all the historical stuff taken care of, but you need to have a solution that takes care of it from that day and every day forward, right? At Vertafore, we accomplished that by automating the upload and intake of our documents. So once a seller sent a contract out through Salesforce via DocuSign, and that envelope moved to completed, the API sent it to Pramata. It was uploaded into our repository, digitized, and key terms extracted. And nobody in legal had to do a single thing for that to happen. And the truth is, right, that's not how it happens for 100% of contracts at Vertafore, but it's like 95%. And that's, again, like this time back you get from automating this stuff, like don't underestimate it. Like life is so good when you're not spending your time doing administrative work. So how do you do this? You avoid solution providers that are trying to disrupt your current way of doing business, right? You want people who enhance, right? But if it disrupts, right? Like things grind to a halt. People start sending you calendar invites for 30 minutes to figure out something that used to take, 2 minutes over email. Don't be tempted. No human is immune from the distraction of the shiny object, right? Like, ooh, this looks great. This looks interesting. It's a trap. Admiral Akbar flashes on the screen. No, it's a trap, right? Don't be tempted to address other problems you didn't set out to. Why? Because the next thing you know, a project that you were going to have value from within weeks or months now is going to be 2 years before you even know if it's going to work. Like, this is how this happens, right? You lose focus, you get distracted. So that's why you need to look for quick wins, because once you succeed, right, here's the thing. By choosing to stay focused and starting with one thing and getting that right, that doesn't preclude doing these other things, right? And in fact, it likely is going to position you to be more successful at them, right? So that's why this is such a sound approach. I had huge success on revenue contracts with Pramata, had a massive failure on vendor contracts with a competitor taking and I don't know why this approach is so pervasive in lifecycle management, like the idea that we have to manage all of the lifecycle or nothing. No, like let's do one at a time. Like the boil the ocean approach, like it doesn't make sense to me. And there are so many failures, and yet they keep like they're sticking to it. Like, guys, stop. And when we went out to bid the new vendor contracts, right, to replace this one, at that time, like I had experience, right? Like I saw what success looked like. I saw the opposite model fail spectacularly. So I had a crystal clear vision, right? I knew what I wanted and I knew what a successful solution would look like. And yet, the majority of vendors that didn't even make it to like the final round, I mean, they were pushing way more functionality than we had in our requirements. And I'd already learned the fallacy of the CLM vision of let's solve everything at the start and just make a bunch of assumptions and hope that they're right, and I knew that wasn't right, like, because I had tremendous success doing it the other way. And I was still made to listen to people who in some cases, were doing their career and had never successfully implemented a contract solution tell me that I should really think about doing it their way. And I was like, wow. Okay, hello. I learned what I learned from the leading private equity firms who have made, billions with these proven methods. And I proved it out myself, So great things are not built all at once, right? Like Rome wasn't built in a day is like literally one of the oldest proverbs there are, right? So, when Vertafore went 2 for 2 when it used this strategy of focus on the repository, and 0 for 1 when we fell into that boil the ocean trap, with a few exceptions. I mean, there's just not enough in the contract industry that is kind of permitting companies to take what Vertafore took, which was like a best-in-class approach, right? Our best-in-class approach to contract lifecycle management meant implementing CPQ and legal supporting terms automation of frequently changed terms on our contract document, and then implementing a digital repository with Pramata. That was our approach. That was best in class, right? We didn't use Pramata for every aspect of it. We used it for what it made sense. And we increased our contract velocity by 50%. And we increased the company's valuation 2x in 4 years. And, the investors made a ton of money. And I talk about these results because they're central to my story and why I joined Pramata. I suffered through so many misguided pitches on flawed contract management solutions. And I know that people are suffering through that too. Like I'm an empath, and I'm also obsessed with efficiency, and to the point where like I feel sick when I hear your horror stories on CLM. So I'm over the horror stories. Like I want to flip the script, because my background, right, isn't just in law. Like I had a corporate period or a career period where I was an entrepreneur, and I was learning and implementing agile software development methodologies, and I was learning lean product development methodologies, right? And all of those are centered on getting that MVP right, and then using that to build your success. And those methodologies are tried and true, right? And they translate here. All right, so here's my key takeaways for avoiding contract management frustrations. Digitize first. Get the data. Digitizing all of your contracts into a single repository is the best practice to start your journey if you have existing contracts. I'm sure if you're like a brand new company that has only done a handful of contracts and wants to like have some, sophisticated process, that you just start out the gate and think that one CLM solution is the right thing, that might make sense. And it might make sense in other contexts too. Like I'm very creative and imaginative, but I think for, the majority of folks listening today, get the data first, start your journey there, because that is crucial to informing you how you want to improve your contracts and contract management, right? That also helps you justify that business investment. Prioritizing your sales and your revenue contracts for digitization provides the best justification. And remember my example, right? By doing a solution for revenue contracts that made sense, that got those key terms together, was best, because when we did do the vendor contracts, instead of trying to have one data model to solve for very different contracts where we care about very different things, we had two, right? One, to best position us to operate, manage, and report on sales contracts. One, to best manage, operate, and report on vendor contracts. And we're super successful with that, and we love it, right? And I think that taking that approach is why. I think had we tried to do everything at once, it really would have compromised our ability to be successful. Which comes to that third point, right? Stay focused. If you want to do all your contracts at once, maybe rethink that. Maybe it's better to prioritize getting your sales contracts together first, right? Because that's easier to, justify business investment, right? It's better focus. And again, right, you can use the learnings from that to then figure out what you want to do when you want to do other contracts in that repository, right? The focus, again, right, it's not just about success, but that reduces your risks, manage your costs, and importantly, it accelerates the time to realize value. So many of these projects suffer from super long implementations, right? And when you avoid a super long implementation, you accelerate your time to value, getting the business to invest and adopt more quickly so that you ultimately achieve the goal you were trying to more quickly as well. Avoid AI hype, right? Technology can do a lot of things, and some of them are really cool. And lawyers are still human. Insert lawyer joke here. And again, we're as prone to be distracted by this shiny object as anyone. And look, curiosity is super important. Like, I built my career on curiosity, but it should never motivate a technology decision. Okay? Select technology for what it does, not for what you imagine it doing. It's really important. Make sure that it does what you want it to do and can be adopted by your group. Finally, the way that you'll be successful at all of this is by remembering that you are the expert on you. I think attorneys do a lot of things well. One of them is when we don't have an expertise, we look to defer to someone who does have that expertise. But these experts in contract management, questionable, right? Ask them what their successes are. Again, validate, get references, understand what people's real experiences have been with those. But also, attorneys are really good at taking a template that has been proven to be successful and adopting it and adapting that template for their own purposes, right? And so, that's what I want to help you do, right? Giving you a template for success by talking about my experience, because you can do these things, right? You can think about adoption on these terms. You can think through this as a business. You can define an MVP and figure out how quickly can we get this repository together? And then what will that allow us to do that we want to? Like, sure, there's revenue data, but there's all kinds of data that you can get out of your contracts and use to support so many business functions, right? Like all those ones I named, Development reached out because they wanted to know whether a certain customer had exclusivity over this new product feature that we were building because another company wanted it deployed, right? I was able to tell them in 30 seconds, right? The business had a mandate from our parent company, Roper Technologies. We need to divest everything in Russia. Within 3 minutes, I sent them a spreadsheet and it listed every vendor in Russia that we as a business were going to need to deal with. Why was that huge? Why were they so like, yes, Foster again delivers? It's because that then positions them to start working on figuring out how they're going to move on without that relationship. The sooner they know, the sooner they can act. But if they don't know, then they're just waiting, right? And the clock's ticking, right? Roper says you guys have 90 days to figure out how you're going to move forward in a world without these Russian resources. So that's something, if you saw the first slide, the guy with the cape, that wasn't me, but I did become a superhero at Vertafore. And it was because I was lucky enough that our general counsel selected Pramata, which was like the coolest software I had ever seen. And I just begged her to please choose it. But also I got to be the administrator, right? And as the administrator, I became that go-to person in the organization where if there's an outage and you want to know what our exposure it is to service level credits for customers, ask Foster, and he can probably tell you in 3 minutes. Like these crazy insights to be able to pull from your body of contracts within minutes, like it's so empowering that you feel like a superhero. It's like a superpower when you get this stuff right. And like, I'm not greedy. I want to share that with you guys. So reach out. I know that it's really hard when you walk into a meeting and people just start to blast you with slides and products and demos and features. And you're like, whoa. Could we maybe just start with I'll talk about my business, what our objectives are, what we're trying to do better, what our, business strategy is and why, this supports this and the time we need to do it. And That's the conversation I would like to have with you, because I think whether or not you want to work with Pramata, the things that I've learned both through, implementing best practices from some of the private equity companies in the world, but also in my time as an entrepreneur when I was, developing, the software for, the technology that I invented and patented. Fun fact, I'm a US inventor too. But, that's why I understand technology at a deeper level than most attorneys. So I want to translate that for you. Like, it really doesn't have to be hard. Like, there's really not a lot of things that you understand that you need to understand about technology. You just need to understand you, right? You need to understand what your goals are, become crystal clear on them. And then, a lot of times, like I said, right, if you're starting as a legal department initiative, that's another thing that I can help you with is how do we talk about our initiative to the business so that we are successful in actually getting the business to fund what we're doing. But this is something that, after 5+ years as a Pramata super user, to finally join as their general counsel, it's like a nerd's fantasy come true. This is my dream. Like, I'm living it. And this is, my first time to really, get out and connect with all of you and start, this process of helping people be more successful in approaching this stuff. So, here's how you guys can find me. And, again, it's expected to be a conversation that's about you, right? And certainly, if there are parts of my experience you want to hear more about, I'm glad to talk about them. But I think what I'd like to do with all of you is help you figure that out, right? What is my minimum viable product for my legal technology solution? And how can I best be successful both with, getting a budget for it, planning and designing it, and ultimately thinking through the adoption, right? And how I get that adopted at my company. These are all things that I would love to talk about.
Thanks a lot, Foster. I know we're super excited to have you here at Pramata. And I know, Shai, you mentioned that there may be an opportunity if people are interested to stick around for networking, talk to Foster, kind of pick his brain. And yeah, I'll kick it back over to you, Shai, for any final closing words.
Yeah, so thank you, Justin and Foster, for a very insightful, very personal presentation. There's a few questions in the chat that I want to get to. Justin, do you want to get them out and serve them up to Foster or answer them yourself?
Yes, so I know we hit Christina's, and I know there was one question, Foster, from Joycelyn, who's actually at Simpler, was asking a little bit about how, you used Pramata to do that health assessment, right? I think you guys use the phrase risk scoring, right, of your contracts. Was there a little bit on the methodology behind that?
Okay, so we actually did a very kind of intense data project, and I could probably spend a whole session with you, and I would be glad to do that. Because just so you know, I have a lot of really great friends at Simpler that I used to work with at Vertafore. Your CEO, BJ Shaknowski, was Chief Revenue Officer, who I made a lot of hay with here at Vertafore. And I also learned a ton about operational excellence and Salesforce and best practices from Alexis May, who is your Senior Vice President over there of operations. And so, yeah, I would be happy to give you that time. But just to kind of, give you the overview, it required us at Vertafore to basically look at the terms in our world that were most important and to give them certain, attributes that were then scored and then, resulted in a risk score. But there's so much to that I think it's probably best, Jocelyn, if you and I just have a huddle at some point.
Maybe a future webinar.
Yeah.
Which is great. So, and I think the rest of them, Chai, we kind of addressed over the course of the conversation. So we should be in a good place on that front.
All right, great. Well, thank you again, Justin and Foster.